Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. You know, it's almost like we're getting on a sort of regular schedule. Changes are coming from me, and that's good. Thank you, supporters. Patreon.com/Crime of the Truest Kind. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind everywhere. Online, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. An appreciation shout out to superstar patron Lisa McColgan and Rhiannon Y. There is a thank you gift on its way to you, Rhiannon. My honorary producers. Total gems. Thank you, Sandy with an I, Pat in New Hampshire. And you are wicked cool, Dom and Rebecca. Thank you to those who dropped tips in the jar. You have, in fact, given the dogs a bone, and, well, they love treats. John F., Barbara the Best Murchie. You can find that link at crimeofthetruestkind.com. And a few folks sent new story ideas this week, and I love those, so thank you, Devin. Right on. Stephanie. I was a little late in my reply to Stephanie. And John F. Thanks for your story suggestions. Those that are already on my list of stories to research get bumped up closer to the top of the list. My name is Angel Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. If you like New England crime stories, well, you've come to the right place. The world is full of tragedy. Day in and day out, we are confronted with it. And it's difficult to process. We are at risk of becoming desensitized. We see this with mass shooting events. They happen at an alarming rate, and we don't seem to be able to process something so disturbing before it happens again somewhere else. This podcast, something I spent a lot of my time thinking about and preparing for, and essentially studying, is about tragedy. I recognize that. The things I talk about here, the events that happen in the lives of families that change those lives in an instant. I make no secret that we need to find compassion. We should tell these stories. And we should tell these stories in a way that is respectful, that offers something more than murdertainment. Can we do that? In New England crime headlines, the death of a Medford, Massachusetts woman who was reported missing and later found dead in a recycling bin outside her home is being called an accidental death. On the morning of Monday, May 23rd, 2022, Barbara Hovey Novice was reported missing by her son, who hadn't seen her since the day before. He found her keys, her phone, her pocketbook, but she was gone. The front door was open and her car was still in the driveway. Her body was discovered a few hours after she was reported missing in the recycling bin under the porch of her duplex in Medford. Fox 25 News obtained the death certificate with the medical examiner's finding that Novice's death was accidental, caused by what they called positional asphyxia. Positional asphyxia occurs when a person is placed in a posture that prevents or impedes the mechanism of normal breathing. If the person cannot escape from that position, they suffocate. The ruling is that she fell into the bin, got stuck, could not breathe, and died there. The death certificate also lists chronic ethanolism, also defined as alcoholism, as a significant condition which contributed to her death, but not an underlying cause. Her family issued a statement about the findings, saying they disagreed with the medical examiner's ruling on her death. In the weeks leading up to Barbara Hovey Novice's death, she had filed an application for a restraining order. On Friday, May 6th, and again on Saturday, May 7th, Barbara Novice wrote that her estranged husband put her in, quote, fear of imminent, serious physical harm. She filed a restraining order application on Monday, May 9th, But on Tuesday, May 17th, 5 days before her son last saw her, she requested to withdraw it. The restraining order application includes information that her husband would not accept that she was filing for divorce, showed up at her residence on several occasions. On May 6th, he showed up at the house and she threatened to call police. There was a report of an argument with her son. Early on May 7th, she wrote that he was back inside her house and she locked herself inside her bedroom. She then had the locks changed in her home to keep her estranged husband out. According to reports, that restraining order was never issued because neither Barbara Hovey Novice nor her husband showed up in court for a hearing. The application and any associated reports remain a part of this investigation. Given this information, the family does not want her death investigation closed. I will be following. The town of Andover, Massachusetts, searches for answers in the murder of Linda and Sebastian Robinson. Officials and residents of the town 24 miles north of Boston cannot possibly make sense of the brutal family murder. In the early morning hours of February 9th, this year, an emergency call came from the family's home. Authorities declined to say who made the 911 call, and in the dispatch recordings released, a man can be heard yelling, "Kill me now." Dispatch alerted officers, the Boston Globe reported, of an unknown problem. The dispatcher is reported as saying, "Male screaming in the background. You can hear things being smashed." Police were at the house within minutes and had to break down 2 doors to get inside, where, it was discovered, 3 people were found dead, all of gunshot wounds. We now know it was the father and husband, Andrew Robinson, 56, who shot and killed Linda Robinson, 55, his wife, and Sebastian Robinson, their 12-year-old son, before shooting himself. The home at 48 Porter Road is valued at $2 million, according to Zillow. It was purchased in June of 2003 for $1.3 million, with an annual tax bill of more than $23,000. I say that for this reason, because no one is exempt. No one is exempt from abuse and violence. It's not just those people, it's all people. Society also loves every instance of schadenfreude, a word we often hear when someone with a perceived level of success experiences something bad. Malicious joy is one way to describe it in English. There is no record of restraining orders and no record of police responding to the address previous to this event. Linda Robinson's family called her intensely private and reserved. Linda had worked as the director of finance at a company known as Semaphore in North Andover for 25 years. She left the company in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. Around the same time, it's believed that her mother passed away. Linda Hashi, as she was known, was born and raised in Lynn, on the North Shore, where she attended Lynn Public Schools and got a degree at Merrimack College in North Andover. She and her first husband, someone named Sean Quinn, purchased the land and built the house on Porter Road in Andover. Linda kept the house and later married Andrew Robinson, who went by the name Drew. It's reported he worked at the Channel Building Company in Wilmington until he left the company about 6 months ago. Now, whether Linda was working at the time of her death is not clear. If she was, it would have been remotely. Robinson family visits were rare. Her father spoke of them having purchased a large freezer that they filled with food, so they didn't have to leave the house. And the house was equipped with generators. Both her father and her brother joked that she had gone into hibernation. No one could have imagined what was to come. The pandemic revealed a new kind of vulnerability, one where domestic violence and intimate partner violence escalated. Women whose relationships were unstable before were forced into far more serious situations. As isolation increased, reports of violence increased. Whether this is a factor in Linda and Sebastian's death isn't clear, but they died as a result of domestic violence. Murder-suicide. Their killer had a gun, and they were shot. What was going on inside that home? We may never know. According to the Harvard Gazette, in 2021, The United Nations published the report measuring the shadow pandemic, violence against women during COVID-19. It said that since the pandemic, violence against women had increased to unprecedented levels. The American Journal of Emergency Medicine said that domestic violence cases increased by 25 to 33% globally. The National Commission on COVID-19 in Criminal Justice shows an increase in the U.S. by a little over 8%, following the imposition of lockdown orders during 2020. The report had nothing more specific for Massachusetts, but they gave no reason to believe that we are any different from the rest. Domestic violence and mental illness can and does happen everywhere. In $2 million neighborhoods, in studio apartments, in trailer parks, and high-rises. Linda was a loving and caring mother to her son Sebastian, who she homeschooled for a time, but found it difficult to manage that and her professional career. This is real talk. Moms can do it all, but it comes with a price. We will talk about that. Sebastian was 12 years old. He started 6th grade at St. John's Prep School in Danvers in September. He played the cello in their music program. Teachers called him a very gentle soul. Sebastian Robinson was a member of the class of 2029, if that is any reminder how much life this kid had to live. On the mass.gov website, you can search by zip code or city or town, or find help in a specific Massachusetts county. If it is an emergency, call 911. I will link all of this information on the show site and the show notes. And Frito is barking upstairs. SafeLink is Massachusetts' statewide 24/7 toll-free domestic violence hotline and a resource for anyone affected by domestic or dating violence. 877-785-2020. Mass relay service available for the hearing impaired. Dial 711. Advocates are bilingual in Spanish and English and have access to a service that can provide translation in more than 130 languages. The National Domestic Violence Hotline offers assistance and safety planning 24/7. 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. If a phone call is not an option for you, you can access the chat online at thehotline.org. In this episode, episode 40, I make good on the other part of that unreleased show with an update on the murders of Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy of Duxbury, Massachusetts. News on the South Shore has been grim. Anna Walsh is still missing, and her husband is charged with her murder. A few weeks later, on January 24th, Duxbury, Massachusetts was thrust into the frenzied media spotlight. Another small oceanside town on the South Shore of about 16,000 people, a 35-mile drive to Boston. Not a lot of things happened there either. A few films set up shop. The Way Back with Sam Rockwell, Toni Collette, Steve Carell, who's from Marshfield. It's set on the Cape with a lot of scenes shot at the Waterways in Wareham, Massachusetts. Pop and Lock. It's a good movie. I would say rent it, but we don't rent movies anymore. Joe Perry from Aerosmith lived in Duxbury for about 30 years. He recently sold his 7,000 square foot pad with a Gibson guitar-shaped swimming pool. That's right. And all the other accoutrements someone in a legendary rock and roll band would have in their home. Like the Boneyard. That's the basement recording studio, where some of the band's songs were written and recorded. Most notably, Just Push Play from 2001. And the blues thing they did, Honkin' on Bobo. Yeah, I didn't buy it either. There is an ice cream shop called Farfar's that named a flavor for the band, Arrow Chip. They're closed for the season, but check them out when they reopen in May. Juliana Hatfield, the singer-songwriter, grew up in Duxbury. I don't know Juliana that well, but I was friendly with her brother. He's very nice. My friends tour with her. Hi, Rice. Hi, Chris. Hi, Ed. Oh, and Mike. Hi, Mike. Duxbury is home to Island Creek oysters. They grow the world's finest oysters and have a damn good time doing it. That's their tagline. I didn't make that up, but I am also a fan. Maybe one day I keep talking about all the glorious places around New England that I'll get tourism money. Much has happened in the Clancy case since I first wrote about it. So let's go over the timeline. On the evening of Tuesday, January 24th, a man in the home at 47 Summer Street called police to report a woman there had jumped out of a second-story window. Now that I read that date, that was 1 month ago. According to published reports, Patrick Clancy came home from running a few errands, a stop at a pharmacy, and then some takeout. And his house was eerily quiet. No sounds, no excited voices, no rhythm of children's feet running around. He looked for his wife, Lindsay, calling her phone at 6:09 p.m. to no answer. Odder still, since he had been communicating with her for much of that early evening. What to get for supper, things she needed at the store for the kids. Searching for her, he went upstairs to their bedroom to find the door locked. Once he got inside, he saw blood on the floor and then the open window. He ran downstairs and into the backyard where he found Lindsay, his 32-year-old wife and mother of their 3 children, lying on the ground with wounds to her wrist and neck. At 6:11 p.m., Patrick dials 911 to report that his wife jumped from the window. Lindsay can be heard on the call saying that she tried to kill herself and jumped. During the same call, Patrick asks for the children. Lindsay says they are in the basement. Duxbury Police Dispatch radios all cruisers to respond to 47 Summer Street for an attempted suicide. First responders show up to find Lindsay Clancy alive. She is breathing and only somewhat conscious. Her husband is with her, and those who first reported to the scene are assessing Lindsay outside. She had very serious injuries. This discovery by itself is traumatic for anyone, but Patrick needs to find his kids. Emergency crews continue to arrive, and Patrick goes to look for the children. Officers and a school resource officer who had picked up an overtime shift that night hear Patrick inside the house. He's found the children. They're in the basement. The sounds of his pain would ring through the home and the lives of those first responders. The agony and the sorrow of being the one who found his children. I wish so much that this was not the case for Patrick Clancy. I wish they did not allow him to go looking for the children by himself. I don't know the exact timeline of the first responders, and I don't know whether the first responders were aware there were children in the home initially, but I wish they could have known, and I wish they could have stopped Patrick from going down there. Officers go to him, and he yells to them that she killed the kids. What they find is grim. The oldest child, 5-year-old Cora, and baby Callan, who was nearly 8 months old, are on the floor of the den in the home's finished basement. 3-year-old Dawson is found on the floor in his father's office. All of the children were found with workout bands around their necks. All were unconscious. As soon as I heard the term workout bands, I thought of how Chris Cornell, the singer from Soundgarden, passed. I will never get over that loss. Lindsay Clancy is stabilized and taken to South Shore Hospital in Weymouth. She has wound injuries and several broken bones in her back and rib cage. We learn that she is paralyzed from the waist down as a result of jumping from that second-story window. The children are all rushed to Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Plymouth, where Cora and Dawson are pronounced dead at approximately 7:28 p.m. Baby Callan, who is still alive, would be med-flighted to Boston Children's Hospital in Boston. Massachusetts state troopers went to Beth Israel in Plymouth to talk to the team of doctors who treated the Clancy children. One of the doctors who cared for baby Callan told officers that the baby's condition was critical. He survived for 3 more days. Callan Clancy died at 11:18 a.m. Friday, January 27th. Lindsay Clancy learned of her baby son's death while still partially intubated at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. She asked via a dry erase board, "Do I need an attorney?" The answer to that question is, you most certainly do. The funeral for the children was held on Friday, February 3rd at St. Mary of the Nativity in Scituate, another lovely South Shore town in Massachusetts. I don't know what was said, but I don't understand the God's will approach to the eulogy. I hate politics and organized religion, so that's as far as I will go with that. And no, Lindsay Clancy was not there. She remains hospitalized in police custody and facing murder charges in the death of her 3 children. A lot has been said about this case, with good reason. I've struggled with it, asking myself, how could this happen? People who think they know and have no idea like to fill in the spaces. Keyboard warriors. They're right up there with web sleuths. A lot of families, particularly women, are sharing their stories. And many of you have shared yours with me since I started talking about this case. And I thank you for that. When news broke about the murders and the earliest suggestion that the mother was responsible, the conversation about postpartum conditions was ignited. What do we know? 32-year-old Lindsay Musgrove grew up in Connecticut and graduated from Lyman Hall High School in Wallingford. She was on the Powder Puff football team, the National Honor Society. It was part of a Health Occupation Students of America, an organization for future health professionals. She went on to Quinnipiac University in Hamden, where she got a bachelor's degree in biology in 2012. 2 years later, she graduated from MGH Institute of Health Professional School of Nursing in Boston. Lindsay and Patrick Clancy got married in December of 2016 in Southington, Connecticut. They started their family soon after, when Cora was born in 2017. Dawson came 2 years later. Lindsay had struggled at times after the 2 babies were born, and she did reach out to a psychiatrist for help with postpartum depression. Baby Callan would come on May 26, 2022, so she would be on maternity leave over the summer. This time around, she wrote in her journal, had gone much more smoothly, attributing being dialed in on her routine of exercise, nutrition, personal development, and mindset. She wrote, that all made the difference. She loved her work as a labor and delivery nurse with Massachusetts General Hospital. But her maternity leave was coming to an end, and she was feeling anxious about going back in September. She sought out psychiatrists and was prescribed medication, including antidepressants, Zoloft, Trazodone, and Prozac, anxiety-targeting benzodiazepine drugs Valium, Ativan, and Klonopin, and Seroquel, the antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder. Patrick said she would take up to 4 pills a day. In late October, she wrote about resentment she was feeling over her older kids. I didn't understand this exactly at first. And she wrote, I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like he's my first baby. And I know that's not fair to them. I know it rubs off on them. So we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection to all of my kids. I know women sometimes struggle trying to find a connection, especially if they're dealing with some sort of postpartum disorder. Just before Christmas, Lindsay is evaluated at the Women and Infants Hospital Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Providence, where she is told that she did not have postpartum depression. On January 1st, 2023, Lindsay Clancy checked herself into McLean Psychiatric Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. This is after she told her husband, Patrick, that she had been experiencing thoughts of harming the children and had written in her journal about suicidal ideation. She stayed for 5 days. Now, whether that's long enough, I don't know. Whether her insurance didn't want to cover more, I don't know. She appeared to be improving, Patrick told the police. She was with the kids and no longer thinking of harming herself. Friends and family were aware that Lindsay was struggling. Only days before the murders, the Clancys go to a friend's for dinner. That friend was surprised to see her. He knew of her mental health troubles, but said she seemed fairly normal, but she was quiet. Members of Lindsay's family had come to visit that weekend. Her mother texted her, telling her how pleased she was to see her doing better. She was reportedly on leave on January 24th and undergoing an extensive program for postpartum depression before the events of that night. Where that program was is unclear, and what it entailed is also unclear. And Patrick Clancy was supporting her by arranging to work from home from that basement office, the same place little Dawson would be found. Yes, Patrick Clancy was clearly aware that Lindsay was struggling. He had voiced concern that Lindsay was being overmedicated and that Lindsay had developed an addiction to benzodiazepines and was experiencing the worst side effects possible. And Lindsay did share some of her experience on social media. In one post, she described an adverse reaction to taking Zoloft that left her with such extreme insomnia and lack of appetite that she had to stop taking it. In the 4 months leading up to the deaths of the children, her attorney said she had been prescribed 13 psychiatric medications, an assortment of benzodiazepines, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, and Ambien, often used as a sleep aid. Lindsay Clancy was arraigned from her hospital bed on Tuesday, February 7th. The arrest warrant charged her initially with 2 counts of homicide, 3 counts of strangulation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a deadly weapon. She remains in a Boston hospital and in police custody. Lindsay did not speak during the hearing. The Assistant District Attorney for Plymouth County, Jennifer Sprague, laid out the grim facts. January 24th began like most days. Lindsay took her daughter Cora to the pediatrician, where there was no sign of anything wrong. They returned home, where Lindsay played in the backyard with the kids, and they made a snowman. Around 4 p.m. is where Sprague suggests things began to change. Lindsay did a search for Miralax. That's something that helps you go to the bathroom. Safe for kids and pets. At CVS in Kingston. She looked up a takeout menu for the 3V restaurant in Plymouth. Sprague said that Lindsay used Apple Maps to see how long it would take to drive from their house in Duxbury to 3V restaurant in Plymouth. The towns are about 14 minutes apart. At 4:53 p.m., Sprague said Lindsay texted Patrick, who was working in their home office, about getting takeout, since she hadn't prepared any dinner, saying she had a long day. This timeline I took from Bob Ward, a reporter for Fox 25 News, who wrote it after he attended the arraignment. At 5:10 p.m., Lindsay phoned in the order, and at 5:15, Patrick left the house. At 5:32 p.m., Patrick was recorded on surveillance at CVS. At 5:33 p.m., Patrick called Lindsay with a question about what she wanted at CVS. She did not answer. At 5:34 p.m., Lindsay called back. The couple had a 14-second phone conversation. Patrick said it sounded like Lindsay was in the middle of something. At 5:54 p.m., Patrick picked up the food order at 3V. Shortly after 6 p.m., Patrick arrives home, and everything has changed. There is the explanation of how he came home to eerie silence, finding Lindsay, finding the kids, and his very obvious shock and sorrow. Sprague said that Lindsay kept a meticulous record of the drugs that were prescribed to her in the months after Callan was born, and that she was never taking more than 3 at a time. In one note, Lindsay had written she was experiencing a touch of postpartum anxiety. It was enough that Lindsay was evaluated at that Providence hospital, where on December 20th, 2022, it was said that she did not have postpartum depression symptoms. Lindsay noted she was experiencing suicidal ideation and thoughts. New Year's Day, Lindsay checked herself into McLean for that 5 days of mental health treatment. When Lindsay emerged from McLean Hospital on January 5th, Patrick Clancy noticed a positive change. She was sleeping better, and they even managed some short day trips from home. Jennifer Sprague said on January 23rd, the day before the killings, after Lindsay's parents spent time with the family, the day was one of her best days. She was happy, smiling. No one saw a zombie on the day of the killing, Sprague said. So what happened on January 24th? We don't know. Lindsay was allowed to meet with a forensic psychologist supplied by her defense attorney, Kevin Reddington. During a visit on Sunday, February 5th, Lindsay allegedly told her doctor that on January 24th, she heard a male voice telling her to hurt the children, and that this was her last chance. Sprague said that this was the first time Lindsay ever talked about hearing a voice. We also learned that in October 2022, shortly after baby Callan was born, Lindsay confided with her husband that she thought she might resent her older children because she thought they were keeping her from bonding with her newborn. Prosecutor Sprague concluded her presentation by telling the judge, death by strangulation is a deliberate and painful process that can take up to 5 minutes. That Lindsay could have changed her mind at any time and spared her children. But she did not. Sprague said that these were planned murders, that they were strangled in the place where they should have felt the safest, with their mother. Her defense attorney, Kevin Reddington, renewed his argument that Lindsay Clancy loved her children, loved being a mother, and that she was caught in the deadly grip of postpartum psychosis and over-medication when she took the lives of her children. Defense attorney Reddington would say this is not a situation that was planned. This is a situation that was a product of mental illness. For now, Lindsay is charged with the murders of 2 of her children. It is very likely she will be indicted in the coming months, and that a 3rd murder charge will be filed against her. Patrick Clancy did not attend his wife's arraignment. However, a lawyer representing him did attend. Lindsay Clancy remains hospitalized. She is paralyzed, and it is doubtful she will ever regain the use of her legs after jumping from that window. Once she is well enough, she will be transported to a facility for further care while remaining in police custody. Patrick Clancy issued a statement on their GoFundMe page. The community has raised more than $1 million to support him in whatever life he will build going forward. It's for medical care, it's for legal expenses. And the community has been incredibly compassionate for the family, not just for Patrick for the loss of his entire family, but also for Lindsay. Patrick Clancy wrote wonderful things about his 3 children. Certainly, I will post a link. You can go and read the entire entry for yourselves. He also talks about his wife, Lindsay, and asks for forgiveness for what she has done. He has much more insight than any of us do about what happened in that home that night. The conversation about postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis has been activated by this case. It's like the emergency call tree. It is something that is real and something that many women suffer from, some in silence. Many are unaware. It's not talked about. Women are supposed to be all things, all of the time. Sleep deprived, super strong, all-knowing, caring, kind, quiet, beautiful, skinny. What happened in the Clancy home that night? Was it postpartum psychosis? It could be. Should we be concerned? We ought to be. And I do have compassion for all involved. While compassion doesn't preclude someone from being punished for the crime of murder, we do have a lot to learn. Whether you believe that Lindsay Clancy was experiencing postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, or any postpartum conditions related to hormones or giving birth, know that there is a legion of women to tell us that this is real and that this is happening, and that simply not enough is being said about what women experience. I hear you. Lindsay Clancy's defense team is hard at work. This is not a situation that was planned by any means, her attorney Kevin Reddington said after her arraignment. This is a situation that was clearly a result of mental illness. A probable cause hearing in the case is set for May 2nd. This case has all the markings of a very famous or infamous case. Andrea Yates, a former nurse who was 37 years old when she drowned her 5 children on June 20th, 2001 in her Houston, Texas home. The facts about what happened were never in dispute. She knew she did it. She said she did it. That morning, after the children finished their breakfast and her husband Rusty left for work as an engineer at NASA, Andrea Yates filled the bathtub and calmly and methodically drowned her children, one by one. Noah, age 7, John, age 5, Paul, age 3, Luke, 2 years old, and baby Mary, who was just 6 months old. Andrea Yates then called 911, asking for police to come. She called Rusty at work, telling him to come home. When the police arrived, she told them, "I killed my kids." A traumatic scene, no doubt. She was arrested. Andrea Yates talked about the thought she had about killing her children for 2 years before she did it. And she kept having them. Her youngest were 2 and 6 months old. She spoke of how she believed she had not been a good mother to them. And there were many religious implications to what she'd done. She claimed to have been marked by Satan, and that the only way to save her children from hell was to kill them. When the state punished her, Satan himself would be destroyed. In her mind, cartoon characters told her she was a bad mother. She heard a human voice telling her to get a knife. On the walls of the jail, she saw satanic teddy bears. She said she was not mentally ill and believed she was never depressed because she had never cried. Andrea Yates was charged with capital murder. Murder 5 kids in Texas. That's going to happen. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. She went to trial later in 2001 and was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Under Texas law, a life sentence meant she would have to serve a minimum of 40 years before being considered eligible for parole. Her conviction would be overturned on the basis of false testimony given by a witness for the prosecution. She was granted a new trial, and in July 2006, Andrea Yates was acquitted by reason of insanity and committed to a state mental hospital. She admitted to what she had done, and she would be punished for it. But what led up to her murdering her family was never really addressed, was it? Like Lindsay Clancy's case, Andrea Yates's case was complicated and complex. There was a lot at play in the Yates family. Christian fundamentalism, questionable mental health care, and inadequacies of medical insurance were all at play. But what was so evident then is so much more glaring now. How society makes judgments against women and disregards women's needs. Postpartum conditions are very real. We are a society that supposedly worships motherhood. I guess they'd like us to believe that. I mean, they literally want every female human to have a baby. I don't have nearly enough time in this episode to break down our lack of support for mothers. Through proper maternity leave, postnatal support, safe working conditions, accessible health care, equal pay and benefits, affordable medical care, and family planning. That's a very short list. Mothers are all powerful. They will flip a fucking car to get you out from underneath it. Pillars of strength and memory to remember any recipe, and forced to suffer quietly. Andrea Yates began to show signs of mental illness shortly after the birth of her first son, when she had a hallucination that involved a stabbing. After the birth of her fourth baby, she took an overdose of sedatives to take her life. She was hospitalized, but discharged before her symptoms resolved, because her insurance company limited the number of days in inpatient care it would pay for. It is believed the same may have happened to Lindsay Clancy, whose hospital stay in early January was only 5 days. Is it possible? Of course it is. Andrea Yates was prescribed antidepressants, but would not take them. A second attempt at her life was made. She held a knife to her throat. She started to self-harm, a voice telling her to get a knife. She became near catatonic, so doctors suggested electroconvulsive therapy, but that was rejected by her family. Who is not clear? Her husband? Finally, a drug cocktail containing an antipsychotic agent was prescribed. It was apparently effective, but Andrea believed she had been given a truth serum. Against her psychiatrist's warning not to have any more children, believing that another pregnancy would almost guarantee a psychotic episode, the Yates had a fifth child. Mary, their only daughter, was 6 months old when her mother drowned her in the tub. At the time she murdered her children, it was determined that Andrea Yates suffered from postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. At 57, she continues to undergo mental health treatment in a facility in Texas. Andrea Yates waives her annual right to be reviewed for release. She has never undergone review, choosing instead to continue treatment. Details of that treatment have never been released. There is one more case that I want to cite, that of Carol Coronado, a 30-year-old woman from Torrance, California, who stabbed her 3 young daughters to death on May 20th, 2014. Not unlike Lindsay Clancy, Carol tried to also commit suicide after she killed her 3 girls. Sophia, who was 2.5, Yasmin, who was 16 months old, and Xenia, who was just 2 months old. Her mother, who she had called several times begging her to come over, begging for her help, came to the home and discovered that Carol had stabbed the 3 girls to death and turned the knife on herself in an attempt to take her own life. She survived and was arrested and taken to jail for the murder of her 3 children. All 3 of these women had multiple births, relatively close together, and newborns under the age of 1 year. Each of Carol Coronado's daughters were a little bit more than a year apart. She had depression, untreated, and having babies so close together for her made her unwell. Clearly, she murdered her children. And I know what you're thinking, some of you. Lots of women have many children close together and don't have murderous psychosis. That's right. Many women struggle and feel a great deal of guilt and confusion of what they're experiencing. And for many women, multiple births can be a trigger. Carol Coronado had 3 and had an infant at the time she killed her children. I'm not going to break down Carol Coronado's case, but there are a few docs online, including one about her case called Not Carol, released in 2019. Not Carol examines the scourge of postpartum psychosis through Carol's case. A judicial system riddled with archaic laws and chronic misunderstanding, Carol's story shines a light on a public health epidemic that is enormous in scale and no one is talking about. Well, we're talking about it. Women who've experienced postpartum conditions describe what they dealt with in terms like a beast, living hell. They felt hit by a bus, being hit by a ton of bricks. They felt anger, had anxiety attacks, uncontrolled thoughts. They felt completely debilitated and unable to care for themselves and their children. They had intrusive thoughts about harm to themselves and their babies. Women have thoughts that are alien to them and torturous. They are afraid and confused, and a lot of shame from the diluted thoughts that have crept into their thinking. Of the women who experience postpartum psychosis, 4% harm their children, and about 5% of these women take their own lives. I hate those statistics. It is crushing. If you think you don't know someone who struggled like this, you will be very surprised at what women will tell you. Postpartum psychosis affects 1 to 2 moms out of every 1,000 births. But many reproductive psychiatrists believe that is an underestimate. Symptoms are easy to miss, and doctors who most often see new moms aren't trained to recognize them. Postpartum psychosis and postpartum depression are not the same. Postpartum psychosis often presents with delirium-type symptoms, confusion, disorganized thoughts, not classic hallucinations or paranoia. The symptoms come and go. One reproductive psychologist spoke of having a patient who was confused at times and then very clear. Women with postpartum psychosis often experience a mood disturbance, either mania or depression. Carol Coronado's lawyers argued that she was depressed, but that her doctors missed that too. Her primary care physician testified at her trial that Carol didn't seem depressed to him when he saw her 6 days before the murders. Postpartum psychosis is a real condition, and whether it spares a woman from serving a lifetime in prison will be up to the attorneys and the judge and the jury. Andrea Yates was convicted in her first trial. That conviction would be overturned, and she was sent to live in a psychiatric hospital. Carol Ann Coronado was convicted in November of 2015 of 3 counts of first-degree murder and the deaths of her 3 daughters, Sophia, Yasmin, and Xenia. Prosecutors declined to seek the death penalty in her case. In 2016, Carol Coronado was sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole for the murder of her 3 daughters. A state appellate court upheld the conviction. Her husband, Rudy Coronado, forgave her. He said, "That is not my wife. The woman who did what she did to her children, that is not the woman I know." What will become of Lindsay Clancy? She's paralyzed. She will need long-term care. She's facing murder charges. Will she be sent to prison? There's certainly much more to these stories than I have told you. There's more to the Andrea Yates story and the murder of her 5 children in 2001. And there's much more to the Carol Coronado story, who murdered her 3 children in 2014. But there are many more stories like this, of women hurting their children, of women hurting themselves as a result of postpartum conditions. And I will leave you with this. The Infanticide Act in the UK essentially provides an alternative approach to the act of killing one's child, given balance of mind, mental disturbance, or simply the act of recently giving birth. It is not a pass. It is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is simply a consideration based on the circumstances. Thank you for listening. This one went long. It's like all those headlines up front, citing cases on the back. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. Follow online at Crime of the Truest Kind. Yes, please drop a review. You can rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I love to read those. Only when you say nice things about me. Become a Patreon patron, 4 tiers, starting at $1 per month. I am looking forward to my time freeing up in the next 2 weeks. I've made some moves. I want to get my time back. I'm working on a couple of things. A live crime stream. We're due for one of those. I want to do one of those at least once a month, especially for the Patreon folks. Talk about whatever you want, usually true crime headlines. And I'm working on an in-person meetup. It looks like it's going to be on the North Shore, Massachusetts, for starters. Where should I go next? What should the next crime of the truest kind New England crime story be? Thank you for listening. Be back in 2 weeks. I'm planning a music festival. You can all come to it. It's called the Rock and Roll Rumble. Lock your goddamn doors.